Welcome to Driven by Data, the podcast, season 4. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Pete Youngs, who is the founder and CEO of Ortecha. Pete, thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, it's all right. Pleasure is all ours. So, where we always start, Pete, is by asking our guests to give themselves a brief introduction into their background and, I guess, journey up until this point in time, if you'd be so kind.
Yeah, of course, happy to. Where are we? 25 years in data. Slightly strangely, I started in automotive engineering. So I've got a degree in automotive engineering, and I ended up doing a master's in computer science as a conversion course, which was my segue into technology and into data. Did the MSc in computer science a long time ago, and then landed a job at a consulting firm called CMG as an IT consultant as a graduate. And they put their grads on two tracks. One was a Microsoft masterclass course, and the other was an Oracle masterclass. And they put me on the Oracle masterclass. So that was where I stepped into the world of data and databases, became an Oracle sort of database developer with them. For those in the know, it's SQL, and PL SQL was the coding language. I don't think it's used quite as much these days. Not quite COBOL, but maybe it's a bit dated now. So cut my teeth with them at CMG, getting interested in data and databases, more the tech side. Eventually left them and I went contracting, ended up at a small consulting firm on a contract basis, and a few contract roles thereon, focused on the database development side around Oracle and getting more interested in data and creeping more into data design and data architecture. And then I joined a large MOD project where I met my two current Ortecha co-founders, David and Stuart. That was a big MOD HR, payroll, financials project for their joint personnel administration. We were on an MOD base down in Winchester, met David and Stuart there. That project finished, we ended up setting up Ortecha, and my personal journey then has moved sort of from the Oracle database engineering, database development into data architecture and into wider data management. And today I find myself as the managing partner of Ortecha, a boutique consulting firm. We've just had some private equity involvement with Debrett's to help us help even more clients. So yeah, it's certainly not boring. I enjoy it, thankfully.
Nice. Yeah. Oracle databases, you took me back there because that was my I know I look quite young, Pete, but that was my first forte in
Really,
the
I didn't know that. Right.
world of data analytics, obviously from a kind of talent standpoint. So
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, we used to well, I say we, the company that I worked for at the time, I was the kind of the Oracle specialist. So we used to staff Oracle projects for consulting firms
Right.
and obviously end user organizations, and yeah, got into some of the real niche stuff around things like Golden Gate and OBIE and
Oh,
all that type of
absolutely.
good stuff.
Okay. We need to have a drink, and
Yeah, there.
there's probably some people we know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's
Yeah.
it. So yeah,
Cool.
obviously you gave us a little bit of a steer there about Ortecha, boutique data management kind of consulting firm. Just give us a bit more insight into kind of the types of stuff that you're doing and the types of organizations
Yeah.
that you're supporting and helping.
Yeah, so we're a boutique consultancy dedicated and helping companies manage their data. Our angle is that we always want to help clients establish sustainable data capability around data management, data and analytics. So what that really means is we want to work with them. We want to help them build trust in their data. It's all really about that trust. The reason you establish that capability, whether it's data quality, cataloging, or whatever, is that you want to improve trust and you want to get value of your data. And I'm sure we'll probably touch on value quite a few times as we go through today, because I think all of your podcast episodes do that. Office in the UK and an office in Nashville in the USA, and working with companies all around the world, which is challenging on time zones sometimes. We're very well known for our work related to DCAM, the Data Management Capability Assessment Model. So that's the Enterprise Data Management Council's data framework. So Mark, our USA managing partner, and I led the working group a few years ago to create the current version of DCAM. Now, why do I mention that? It's because as a boutique firm, we want to lean on a framework. Why would we reinvent the wheel? So we're always promoting that with our clients, and DCAM is our chosen framework. Yes, there are others out there. Dharma is the other main one. So yeah, we use DCAM a lot. We don't insist a client uses the framework when we're helping them, but it's a great reference point if they do choose to use it. So if we think about that, the way we're helping clients, it's data strategy, helping them to set their goals and objectives around data, moving into data operating model that we're going to touch on quite a lot today. And then into the execution side, how they can get their tooling right, whether it's cataloging and so on, execute really well. So we talk about services ranging from advise and educate through to collaboration. And the client can choose whether they just want sort of high level advice and touch points and sounding boards through to, okay, bring a team in and help me to do this. We often say teach us to fish, teaching them to fish so they can do it. The best practice side around DCAM and so on, I think it's a really important thread as well, because we're really keen from all of our people that they're involved in best practice. And that means that we're continuously learning and we're continuously involved in EDM Council working groups. And then that's a thread again that comes through into service delivery. So it's almost like, why should you work with us? Why should you trust us to know what we're doing? Because we're helping to define the best practice and we're involved in that as well. So I hope that says we're not just making it up, and you can believe what we're saying when we advise you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, makes a lot of sense. I mean, the data operating model debate, as you know, has been living long in the memory, and I guess there's a lot of
Yeah.
these almost trends and cycles, if you like, that play a part into that. And I'm looking forward to kind of getting your steer, Pete, on how you help organizations to decide which is the right route for them, because I think that's from a lot of the events that
Yeah.
we host and conversations that we have and through our day job, that's often one of the things that many data leaders are challenged with, is kind of what is the right model, and the subjectivity and the
Yeah, absolutely.
contextuality of the organization obviously plays a big part into that. But I guess as a kind of jumping off point for us then, how much do you think choosing the right data operating model determines the success of the data and analytics initiatives that businesses ultimately run?
Yeah, I think so. I've mentioned data strategy and data operating model. I think data operating model is more important than strategy. I think people go back often to strategy because it's how you set your vision and your goals. And I'm not saying that it's not important. It is important. But I think if you force me to pick one of the two, I would actually lean on data operating model, because you can sort of muddle along without strategy. People generally will know where they want to go if they're running an organization and then they're in a leadership role, and they will nudge in the right direction. So it's not good to be absent of a strategy, but you can get away with it. But data operating model being the way that you operate, the way that you work, the way that you function. If you want to take data seriously, then taking your data operating model seriously is a really important thing. And I think a lack of a data operating model basically means you're not operating efficiently and effectively. Essentially, you're day-to-day chaos. I'm not exaggerating. People don't know what they're meant to be doing. They don't know why they're meant to be doing it. They don't know how to do it. So we say strategy is the what you want to do, what you want to achieve, and operating model is the how. So yeah, I would say success in enabling an efficient data and analytics comes from a good data operating model, even in the absence of strategy. So getting that right, I'd say, is the most important thing that you can focus on.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. I mean, I think we've had talked on many a LinkedIn thread in the past about the
Yeah,
absence of data strategy, and how many data analytics initiatives were born out of things that weren't strategic at all, right? So
yeah, completely.
hype and fear of missing out, and many businesses actually enter this and start building stuff and so on and so forth without any strategy. Curious to know, and I'm just thinking out loud here, Pete, but do you find then that if you go into a business where there isn't a data strategy present, that they have tried to define a data operating model, or does it normally not exist if there isn't any type of thought around the strategy?
Yeah, it varies. So our ideal client unsurprisingly, perhaps, is a chief data officer or chief data and analytics officer. But by the very nature, when we're talking to that person, you've started to establish your data operating model, because the CEO, someone as a leader of an organization has said, right, we need to take data seriously. We need to appoint someone to look after data, even if it's not a CDO, if it's data and tech or whatever. They've said we need to do something around data. So someone in a senior role has said, let's do something about data, and so we need a role to lead that. So although our ideal client profile is the CDO, that's actually a step further on. So you can take it back almost to a CEO question, and that is the very start of an organization's journey into data and analytics. So then to step in and work with a CEO to either define the MVP data operating model of how they can get started, to bring the person in who's then going to lead that team and then iterate from there on. Our journey, in theory, starts with a leader conversation around CEO and then coalesces around the CDO when they're appointed. But I would generally say our main point of contact is the chief data officer or chief data and analytics officer. So that's obviously right at the start of the journey, where they're saying, okay, we want to take data seriously. We need to know how we're going to operate around data. Yes, we need the strategy as well, of course, but operate around the data and setting the team structure and the organization up for success it is where that starts. I think it's important to say that obviously a data operating model being established, the ways of working, the tooling, the people, the technology around how we're going to manage data and realize value from analytics shouldn't stand still. So that the CDO comes in, set the team up for how they think they can achieve the business and data strategy. But then obviously it needs to iterate thereon. Some things aren't going to work and you're going to iterate them. You may need to expand, you may need to federate down into different business divisions and so on. So the very start of that journey in an immature data organization of setting up the initial data operating model, and then the iterations of that thereof, once you've got a data leader, a data officer in, equally important key point is it's not one and done. You need to iterate that data operator model and monitor that it's working for you.
Yeah, I mean, I found that really interesting that organizations might have thought about, well, how are we going to manage our data? Like, how are we actually going to operate with data?
Yeah.
Sometimes in the absence of knowing what they're trying to achieve, which
Yeah.
it feels a bit odd, right?
Yeah, but I think it's really common. You mentioned it just now. It's like the magpie effect and the buzzwords, especially around AI and Gen AI. Gee, the nudge that's given data around, hang on, we need to move into Gen AI. What are we going to do? Whose role is it? Is it tech? Is it data? And the trigger effect that had to say, okay, but we need to be doing something here. How do we do it? Who does it? I'm not saying that's given a flurry of data operating models, but it's really making people think about, where does that sit? How do we do AI safely as we venture into it? I think Chris Bannock in one of the earlier podcasts talks about enthusiastic exploration and experimentation. And I found that really interesting, because the whole Gen AI thing is that people are just, oh, well, let's have a go. But whose responsibility is it? And I think in a lot of cases, it's falling to the CDO because it's a thread of analytics. And it's interesting to see that generating the interest and people's perspective on how can we pay more attention to data, because the data underneath AI is obviously critically important.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've said on many of these podcasts now, but the opportunity that Gen AI presents has definitely brought a bit of a spotlight back onto data management, where
about time too, Carl.
Yeah, I was going to say about time, but yeah, historically, where that's probably struggled for the airtime it should deserve, all of a sudden, this shiny object over here is kind of inadvertently giving it an opportunity to kind of be brought into the conversation a little bit more, which obviously is a good thing. I know many CDOs that are really kind of grasping that opportunity to take advantage of that. So
quite right too.
Yeah, it feels like an opportune moment in time for sure. So, keen to speak to you about the people component then of operating models, because I think one thing that I see and hear a lot of is when you start to hear these debates about operating models, I think there's almost a bit of a disconnect really, where people start to confuse the operating model more holistically with team structure. And obviously they are
Yeah.
two different things, but very interconnected. But
Yeah. Yeah.
you often hear like, oh, well, yeah, we're running a centralized operating model. And it's like, well, but really there you're referring to where the people sit, not the
Exactly.
operating model in of itself, right? Just talk to us, in your opinion, about the difference and then I guess the relationship between those two things, if you would.
Yeah, I think people is probably the most important part of a data operating model. And I agree. I think we're actually working with a wealth management client at the moment. And it has started with a PowerPoint page and a team structure. And like, well, if we put the person in there, what's the team structure that's going to sit underneath? It's a good starting point. It's just getting people thinking about the roles and responsibilities they might need. But yeah, it is absolutely more than that. So we would talk about four parts of the data operating model that I think we'll come on to later. So people, process, data, and technology. And as I say, people probably the most important part, but you do need the others as well. And yes, it is the org chart. It is the chief data officer that sits at the top, and it is the data governance lead and DQ lead and data stewards and data owners and data product owners, data product managers, and so on that then sit within those teams. So you absolutely do need to think about the org charts, conventional org charts, and the hierarchy of people and what their roles and responsibilities are and who reports to who. But it's more than that. It's what is the central data team? If you're in an organization where you're centralizing some capability, which is typically the case, you've got a chief data officer in the center with a team underneath. And then often you've got federated teams in business areas or business divisions or departments that have almost like business aligned responsibility, like HR or finance or risk or operations and so on. So the org charts are a really important part of it. The team structures are a really important part of it, but there is more to it. And I think it's really important to say it's not just a nice PowerPoint. It's not just creating a nice diagram using smart art in PowerPoint and saying we're done. It's the definition of the roles, it's the responsibilities, it's taking those responsibilities forward into OKRs or whatever your means of measuring performance is, and embedding it in your ways of working. So yes, org chart team structures are a gesture and part of that, but it's more than that. It's part of your business operating model. So we can't think that data operating model and data team structure is separate and operates differently to the rest of your business. It's got to align with your chosen way of operating your business because it is just a subset of that. And we know data is pervasive, it's everywhere. And if they conflict, if your data operating model conflicts with your business operating model, I know that sounds odd, why would you do that? But it does happen because sometimes it gets defined in a silo. It's just not going to work. It's setting yourself up to fail.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously in our line of work, we do a lot of work with organizations from a kind of talent attraction and retention perspective. And often part of that depends on the maturity of the organization and, how long they've been on the data analytics journey. But often you will find that the organizations have been running at this and they haven't done
Yeah.
anything like role profiling or career
Yeah.
pathways, or
Yeah. I think we've touched on it before, haven't we? Yeah.
yeah, anything around that, and you kind of look at it and just think, how on earth are you expecting to win in this landscape
Yeah.
when you're kind of shooting blind, which is another conversation for another day, I'm sure. You talk there about the whole centralized, decentralized. Obviously, the hub and spoke kind of model has become very
Yeah.
popular as a bridge between those two things. Are you seeing anything there in terms of, because these things again are often quite cyclical, right? You see a big shift to centralized and a big shift back to decentralized and so on and so forth. Are you seeing any kind of common threads amongst the market in terms of, what the flavor of the month is currently?
Yeah. Um, I think there's anecdotes around this and how it evolves over time. And I think it's somewhat exacerbated by this tenure or perceived tenure issue with the chief data officer, like 2 to 3 years in the role. Obviously, a new leader come in generally means an organizational change and therefore an operating model tweak change. So I think often there's anecdotes around flip-flopping between centralized, decentralized, federated, and so on. But I think that's based on a desire to change, either driven by a new leader or evolution of an operating model. I think what we generally see, as I've touched on, is a centralized data team under a chief data officer. This does vary by organization size. So generally a central data team with a chief data officer defining those central capabilities that need to be rolled out across the organization. And then in a larger organization, especially in banking and sort of regulatory driven environments, then divisional teams with divisional data officers or even divisional CDOs, divisional data DDO or CDO, with that business aligned sort of looking after the data in the context of that part of the business, whether it's people, finance, risk, operations, and so on. So generally, centralized capability and including, for example, tooling that everyone is going to use, data catalog tools. You should, in theory, only have one. You're not going to have one in different business areas. You might choose to use them differently. Why would you do that? I'm not sure. So driving that centralized capability, the ways of working from a central perspective, but then federating down the execution of those into the different business teams. So general answer of a sort of standard model would be central data team, federated accountabilities within business teams. If you're in a really small organization, you've got more options to maybe centralize stuff and do things on behalf of other teams that are small, always making sure that you're not driving the message of the data team owning all of that data, because it's just an impossible ask. You might look after the master data and so on, but the transactional data needs to be aligned to the business processes. So yeah, generally central data team, generally federated accountabilities. Decentralization, I think, is rare. There was one large bank that we worked with who did have a very, very small central data team and then decentralized capability within business teams. Let's just say that bank isn't operating in the way that it was operating today. So maybe that wasn't the right answer.
Mm. Interesting. I mean, I think, you know, we have these conversations in our industry quite flippantly, but actually getting it right is a fundamental pillar of, you know, how
Yeah,
successful these things will be or not be, right? And
yeah,
it's like anything. I often kind of relate it to like football management, soccer management for our, you know, friends across the pond. It's like
yeah,
you choose a philosophy of playing, but if you don't have the players to play that way or the ability to attract the players to play that way, then you're gonna struggle. So yeah, there's
yeah,
so much that goes into thinking about it, which I guess is where I want to bring us onto, Pete. If there are people out there then that are, you know, at the start of this journey or they're about to go in somewhere and, you know, kind of have to overhaul something, let's say, what would be the kind of key considerations that you would kind of prompt them to think about in terms of designing and defining their op model? Because I imagine some of the variables that you just mentioned play a part, right, in terms of like size and scale and sector and
yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah. Good question, because we haven't really defined what the data operating model is. I think I've briefly touched on it, but for us, four main parts. I think there are ancillary and supplementary parts you can move into, and I think we'll mention data culture a couple of times. So people, process, data, and technology are the four parts everyone should focus on. We've said that the people bit is probably the most important, and that is defining the team structures, both central and federated or decentralized, if you choose to go down that route. Importantly, the roles and the responsibilities, really thinking about embedding those in balanced scorecards, OKRs, whatever your performance management approach is. Otherwise, it becomes a bit superficial inside of the desk. So people bit, I think that's probably quite clear to most people. I feel like I should go to process yet, but I'll go to next, but I'll go to technology. So it's around the tooling as well. So this is the point. It's not just a team structure. If you've got the people in place, you need to automate data processes. So the technology, and it's the usual IT stuff. It's the right applications that you need to manage your data. The really well-known ones are data catalogs like Calibra and Elation, DQ tools like Datactic, Satacama, and so on, lineage tools like Solidatus. And yes, maybe there should be less tools, but about thinking about the right tool for the job. So the technology part of how you'll automate data processes, how you'll harvest metadata from data platforms and technical things like that. So you need to make sure you've got the right people in the right roles. the right technology to automate the business processes around data that you need to automate and make everything really efficient. The third part is the data bit. And it's not to say in your data operating model, you need to define all of your data in your organization because you're going to be there forever. And that is steady state data management. But you need to explain how you're going to represent that data. Now, the older school approach was around using data domain models, and the more progressive approach now is around data product management. So you need to say, without defining all of your data, how is this going to work? How are you going to represent your data? And it gets a bit geeky here because you're really saying, what is the metadata model that you're going to set up in your data catalog that takes you back to the tooling? How are you going to populate that? How are you going to let people search for data, find it, click a magic button and say, right, I want that data, get it to me now. And that is called the metadata model. And people can geek out on that all day long. We won't go into too much detail on that. And then the fourth part, so people, technology, the data bit, and then the process bit that we really call capability, the ability to do things with data. So that is, what processes are the people going to execute automated in the tools on the structure of data that we're interested in managing. And it's really the bit that glues it all together, because if you've got the people, you've got the tooling, and you understand and you can represent your data, then there's all the processes that will run day to day. Like, how do you catalog something? How do you provision data? How do you measure the quality of data? How do you present the quality of data so people can know if they're going to trust that data? So people, process, data, and technology, four key parts. So everyone should be thinking about those. As to different org sizes, even regulatory drivers, I think we've touched on. Size is a really significant factor. If you're in a really large global bank, you are going to probably have that central data team with divisional data teams and then with data stewards underneath. And it's a huge operating model if you were to put it in terms of a people structure on a page. And it can get complicated in terms of tooling, and some organizations choose to have different instances of tools and so on, like catalogs, which I think you've really got to question why, because you should be opening up the data for everyone to find. In a small organization, much more compact, you've got different options, people are closer together, people know each other more, so you can make things lighter. So that if we think about that large bank from a command and control perspective, that's one size and way of working, regulatory driven, policy driven. Smaller organizations like small charity, for example, much more nimble and agile, and you've got much lighter options that you can bring in. Reg drivers, reg is going to make you do things in certain ways, and even down to GDPR. So in the UK, data protection regulation, that any company is involved in that. So you have got to think about that as an aspect of data management, and that would come into the people side and the processes side of how you manage some of that data. So regulation varies dramatically from data protection through to the banks and the healthcare companies. They've got really stringent regs that really policy driven, really tight risk management. So yeah, there are definitely some patterns that can be applied and considered, and a really important point is aligning to that business operating model. And if that's set in a certain way, don't try and change that. Make sure you align with that and you fit into that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, do you run into the same kind of challenges, or is it a little bit more evident? And I guess if so, what are the ways that you identify what that business operating model is? Because if you think about, like, I don't know, data strategy, and we always hear the, should be related to the business strategy. And then you hear people say, oh, well, I'm not quite sure what the business strategy is, which
we haven't got one.
yeah. Or something like that. Is the operating model of the business normally a little bit more obvious? Because I guess it's normally people sat in certain roles, certain things. No, okay, perfect.
Yeah, again, I think the team structures can be really obvious. Even like in tools like Microsoft Teams, you can now click on people and you can see the hierarchies and so on. So often that information is really accessible. But yeah, sometimes the business operating model isn't well defined. So we're always going to run a discovery phase where we're harvesting information from both the data people in the organization and wider where necessary to understand what have you got today, to make sure that we're going to align with that and not conflict with it. But yeah, business strategy not being documented, business data operating model not being documented is quite common, unfortunately.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Who who's normally responsible for defining and designing the kind of the data operating model? And I guess, what are the considerations around the business more holistically, need to be thought about?
Yeah, so the chief data officer, the data leader in the organization, whether it's CDO, CDAO, head of data, whatever, it does sit with them. I think then it's actually not necessarily they're the one holding pen to paper. They're going to have ideas. They're going to be consulted, and I think this varies. It often falls to a data governance team within a wider data team. Sometimes there's a data strategy team, and they might be involved in it because they're setting the strategy and thinking about the operating model. But I think in the absence of that, a data governance team is often where the roles and responsibilities are defined of how we're going to manage data in an org. So yeah, CDO's opinion and experience and perspective seeded with them on paper, but as that data governance team, typically that's the location where this would be managed, defined, and implemented from. And in a large policy-driven organization, that does tie in with policy. The roles are going to be mentioned in policy. You've got these accountabilities and responsibilities in policy, fully aligned with the operating model. Again, I think we've touched on that, but it's important to say that the CDO doesn't have carte blanche, just come in and say, this is what I did before and this is what I'm going to do again, though, because that ain't necessarily going to work in that organization. So again, that alignment to the business operating model, understanding of the ways of working in that organization, alignment of that is really important. So yeah, CDO ultimately accountable, likely a strategy or governance team that's creating it. I would say a thread into business architecture or business design if the organization has it, and not every org does, because we are really designing a part of the organization. And as we say, it's got to be aligned with that. So consultation with them, the heavy lifting done within the data team to then plug back into the wider org design and business operating model, if indeed it exists.
Yeah. What I'm just thinking there as you were talking, obviously the importance of getting this bit right, and I guess the relationship then with the whole debate around adoption, right? So if we kind of take it from one end to the other and think about fundamentally, most data analytics capabilities are built to try and drive value in quotation marks, whatever
Yeah.
that means in the context of that business. Often the thing that lets it down or prevents that from happening is this whole notion of, you start to talk about culture and you start to talk about adoption, you start to talk about literacy or fluency, and there's kind of a thread there that ties all of this stuff together in some kind of
Yeah.
weird and wonderful way. But I guess what is the relationship in your eyes between having the right operating model and getting to that end state of value, and I guess the relationship in that almost like three-pronged triangle with adoption? Does that all kind of come together, really?
Yeah, I think that any data practitioner should always be thinking about value. It feels like a no-brainer to say, but doesn't always happen. And sometimes we get a bit stuck in the academic aspects of data and the definition and implementation of foundational capability that's a stepping stone to value. But then we find ourselves having done loads of work, popping up and saying, right, we're ready to go. And the CEO saying, well, you've been doing that for like 6 months, but what value have we actually delivered? So that is a bit of a trap. So I think the operating model, I think, is essential to value, having the right roles and responsibilities, operating on the right things, executing the right processes and ways of working. Is absolutely needed. I think that always driving that mindset of why are we doing something related to data and what is the value that we get from that. So that it's a slight tangent, but I think this demonstrates it. So in Ortecha, we've got a little framework, DCAM like big data framework, and loads of sub capabilities and loads of words in that massive DCAM book. So we boil down data management into 5 steps, and we call it Ortecha Trust. So it's define, locate, trace, measure, and control your data. So if you're doing those 5 things, it means you've defined your data, you understand what it is. Locate it means you know where it lives. It's in your data platform, or if it's in your CRM, or it's in your HR application. Define, locate, trace is how it flows, because it never sits in one place. It flows around the organization from front office in a bank through to finance and risk and reporting and so on. So define, locate, trace, then measure. Everyone wants to know the quality of the data. So you've got to be able to show people, is the data okay or not okay? And then control, which putting a wrapper around that and saying, if you do all those things, then you're managing a set of data and you're going to look after it from there on. So we always say when you're implementing your data operating model, you'll get to a point where you've got the people hired, you've got the tooling in, you know the processes that you're meant to be running, and then you're executing and you're doing day-to-day data management. So to run those 5 steps on an operational basis, but always in the context of a value and having a use case backlog, we call it a value case backlog, to say these are the important things that we need to do related to data to improve and improve data within the organization. So then delivering it in the context of value is really, really important. So we would always be encouraging our client, get your data operating model right, but on an MVP basis, because otherwise it can turn into quite a big foundational piece of work. Start to execute, start to deliver value and implement slithers of your data operating model, and then continue to deliver value as you almost roll out your operating model across your organization. So it's really important to not fall into that trap of going away and establishing a best operating model ever, but not implementing it and not changing the way the organization works on data and delivering value. You've got to balance the two. And I think in today's economic climate, that's even more important than it ever was. People really don't have the appetite for long running foundational projects anymore. It's like, just come on, let's hit the ground running, give me some value immediately, which you can't really argue with, can you? It's probably how it should have been all those years ago as well. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think the days of, these major kind of transformational type projects that are, 3 years in the making to see any results,
Yeah,
especially as you said in the kind of economic or macroeconomic climate that we now find ourselves in, are, increasingly becoming less common
yeah,
and just flying a lot less,
yeah.
I'd say.
Incremental value. Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. And obviously, we always talk about this notion of quick wins, right?
yeah,
Which,
absolutely.
yeah, is obviously important. Do you find that, because I touched upon the kind of concept of adoption often being one of these things that's kind of held up and spotlight shone up on it as to why actually organizations have struggled to get value out of it. The work's been done, but actually getting business users or, non-data people to actually
Mm,
do it, or use it,
yeah.
or whatever the case may be. Should that be kind of an integral part of the data operating model in terms of how you factor in what that looks like and making sure you've got the right processes in place to make sure that adoption occurs?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess effective implementation, um, not just defining it and hoping, to define something and then make sure it's implemented. And I think this is it's a time for focus. And I think often enough focus isn't put on it because it takes loads of effort. And this isn't from a consulting firm's perspective. We're happy to help a client, but what we want with a client is to help you understand what capability you need, seed that, and help you to establish it internally so you can then operate. Because then we'll have a great relationship with a client because they feel they trust us and we've done really good things for them. But it really does take a huge amount of effort. And I think people underestimate this. And I often talk about underinvestment in data. There is investment in data. I think a CEO and a CDO, or CDO probably knows, a CEO would be shocked if they really knew how much it's going to cost to do this right. And I know that's the difficult thing to have a conversation between a CDO and a CEO about. So yeah, for me, it's more effort. We've got the best data operating model. You really need to focus on the implementation of that. And it's not the whole organization. As I said, it can be slithers. You can find your champions, you can make a difference, and then almost you can use those champions to help you move into other areas. And it's sort of a snowball that starts to roll. So yeah, the effort is always underestimated. So making sure you've got the champions internally, they're going to help roll that data operating model out and do the right thing. But yeah, really making sure the data team, with any external support, if that's what you want to do, is focused on that. And I think some of it comes back to that CDO tenure as well. It's like, don't think it's 2 years in a large organization or even medium-sized organization, frankly, and you're done. This is a long-running thing. We're ultimately changing the culture over time. I would rather see a chief data officer appointed with like medium to long-term goals over 5 years, rather than after 6 months shouting that to say, why haven't you got all the data in my data lake? Why aren't we a highly performant data-driven organization? Hey, come on.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. Data is pervasive, it's everywhere. So we've got to give them the opportunity to succeed. We've got to allow focus. Equally, the CDO's got to manage expectations and help people understand this is a journey. It's going to take time. We're going to take your priorities. We're going to deliver value. We're going to change the culture of the organization, and we're going to move to being more data driven, or whatever we choose to call it. But yeah, focus and time, I think, are the two things that really catch people out, because just not enough focus and not enough time is spent on it. And people get a bit of fatigue and things can fail.
Yeah, I think the what you talked about there in regards to, probably most CEOs would be shocked if they knew actually what it was really going to
Yeah,
take. And I think that's something that I've seen again and again and again, right? Not just in terms of money, but probably time investment and,
yeah,
resource and all of that type of good stuff. And probably, to be honest, Pete, why organizations like yours as a more boutique advisory firm
mm,
in this space exist, right? Because I think what we
yeah,
have a lot of conversations, and there tends to be a general reluctance if they've not gone on this journey so far. Most business leaders that we speak to kind of sit in the camp of, we're not sure that we want to commit to something without knowing what it's going to take. But there's no point in bringing a chief data officer in, paying them a nice big salary, and then them saying,
yeah,
"Look, here's the strategy, and here's the operating model, and here's what it's going to cost, and here's what it's going to take," and then them go, "Oh, well, actually, no, we don't have the appetite for that." And equally, they don't want to do the same thing with like a McKinsey or a Bain, and pay them
yeah,
10 million quid to get the same outcome effectively. Uh,
yeah,
which is why I think it's really important that there are smaller players in this ecosystem that can actually
yeah,
give good solid advice around, right, this is actually what it's going to take, what it needs to look like,
yeah.
yeah.
And frankly, it's our job to break that down as well, because no one ever wants to know, right, you're going to see a realization of value in 3 years' time and it's going to cost you a lot of money. Well, even if that is true, break it down for me. Give me the long-term goals and what's going to be different in the future, but show me what the 3 6 month increments of value are and how I get value for money on that. And that's absolutely right. But I think that just driving that message that you can get incremental value, but if you really want to change to be a high-performing data organization, it is going to take a long time, assuming you're changing an organization with seeded behaviors and ways of working that you are looking to shift over time.
Hmm. You talked earlier about, the possibility of going in and, providing an MVP and kind of tackling this stuff in pockets and showing the value
Yeah,
quickly, and then you can spread, which obviously it makes absolute sense because it allows you to demonstrate the value quickly, and it's not wholly expensive, and so on and so forth. But do you feel, and I know this would never happen per se, but in an ideal world, is that kind of counterintuitive to the longer term goal? If you're almost kind of creating these mini data operating models in silos, or I guess how do you then scale that without it kind of
yeah.
halting the progress of the overall goal?
Yeah, no, it's got to be in with the coherent overall data operating model in mind. So, for example, you would need to seed if we accept there would be a central data team, and then you've got federated capability and people in different business teams. It would be get your MVP central team in place, and then find the most valuable use case in that business division, and then bring in the right people in that context to deliver that piece of value. So your goal is always to build out little chunks or slithers of the overall operating model, and then like bringing people in. And so with every value case that you deliver, you're expanding. Well, you could be delivering value in the same area, but in theory, you're expanding your operating model implementation in a coherent way rather than driving silos and pockets. So yeah, I think that's an important one for people to think about, is just beware It's not about pockets of capability operating independently, unless you want to be decentralized, because that is a decentralized model. It's about building up incrementally your operating model whilst delivering value. So yeah, really important clarification.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so it's an enterprise-wide designed data
Yes,
offering, but just delivered and implemented in specific.
manageable chunks.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, makes perfect sense. What are the symptoms of success? Like, how do you measure what kind of good looks like and that you're heading in the right direction?
Oh, there's a question, isn't there? So yeah, I think monitoring, it comes back to that. It's not just defining the operating model and then running away on value cases, use cases, and implementing. You've got to monitor that. So I think part of that central team's responsibility is to monitor the implementation of the operating model. We often talk about the metrics, and there's some really simple things like if we think about that coherent enterprise data operating model, what is our total number of data stewards that we are going to appoint one day? And there's a metric to say we've appointed 5% of them, and it's in these business areas. And then to sit beside that and say the value that we've realized through having them appointed and having them operating is ideally in monetary terms, but it's not always. It could be a revenue gain, a profit gain, efficiency gain, a regulatory compliance thing. Um, so the metrics of any good data office coming into play there and saying this is how we can tell the story of how we have been effective in the organization. And it's not a claim of the CDO, Chief Data Officer, trying to lay claim on everything good that's been done in the organization. It's a reporting thing to say, in a bank, the commercial bank did a really good thing and we increased revenue by X through the use of data. The commercial bank did it, but the data team and the data stewards and the data product owners were involved in that. They were part of it. It's not laying a claim on that total revenue increase. It's just making the point that we can measure the impact of the good things we're doing on data by having the data operating model implemented and focusing on value. So yeah, it comes back to the metrics, I would say, and making sure we're monitoring the rollout of that. What both in terms of the overall perspective on implementation of what we want is that enterprise data operating model, but also reporting the value that we're delivering as we go. So I think metrics are your friend there, and good, clear reporting to your leadership so they can really understand it. Otherwise, you're operating and implementing in a vacuum, and one day someone's going to say, well, what have we actually done? Because you haven't really told me. That all I hear is we're implementing our data operating model, but I don't really understand. So you got to make it real. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. You touched upon data products before.
Yeah.
How does how does that fit into the operating model? And I guess there's the notion of data products or data as a product or whatever the right terminology is
Yeah.
now. Has that changed how businesses implement the operating model?
Yeah, I think it has. And I think it should, importantly. It's a more progressive perspective on how we should be managing data. So if we, and thinking about those four core parts of the data operating model, people, process, data, and technology. So the data bit, how we represent what our data is and how we're going to manage what data. The older school perspective here was we worked on data domains. So we defined quite high level buckets, even like finance and people or HR. And then we aim to appoint a very senior leader, like in finance, was typically your CFO, Chief Financial Officer, to be the accountable person for all of the data within finance. And you get it, it sort of works. It's very senior accountability around a very high level grouping of data. Now, if you take that data domain approach, you do break the data down. You'd say in finance, you've got general ledger data and you've got accounts payable, accounts receivable, so on. So you do start to break the data down, and you have to make it real. But it does start from a very high level perspective and a top down approach. Data product management almost flips that on its head and says, okay, what is an important data product that on value has got value to the organization? So we started it from a more granular perspective. And with data product management, you want to define a data set. And you do talk to some data practitioners and they say it's like Emperor's New Clothes. We used to just call them data sets. Now we call them data products. Probably true. But thinking about product management and how that applies to data, I think is a good thing. Anyway, defining granular data sets like customer data. This is going to be your customer name. It's your date of birth. It's your customer address. There's a little packet of data and saying, right, we can manage that. We can define it. We know where it lives. We can look after it. We can know the quality of it. We can know how we provision it to people. It just becomes really precise. So when you're trying to roll out a data operating model in little chunks with a value aligned to data product management, you're saying, okay, what is the data product we're working on? What are we going to establish? Is it one data product? Is it multiple? Then perhaps they roll up into a bigger product. So it just becomes much more precise. So I'm a real advocate of data product management. I think it's a nudge in the right direction. It avoids ambiguity and it avoids that abstract nature of data domains. They can work, don't get me wrong, because you drive from the top down. But I think discrete data sets, which let's call data products, and I know people can have a go at me on LinkedIn for not using the right terminology, and I'll debate that with them all day long. It's a really good evolution of practical application of data management that is real, and even into the commercialization, monetization of data, if that's what you want to do, a marketplace of data products that you're selling externally or even internally. I think it's a good thing, and I would encourage people to fit data products into their data operating models and take that path.
That's interesting. I guess what would be the new train of thought then around how that you fit that in? You know, if there's and you know, if someone's out there thinking, you know, right, I'm going to be building
Yeah.
data operating model here. How does the data product piece fit? Like, what are some of the things to consider?
Yeah. You can definitely evolve. If you've gone down a data domain perspective, you can absolutely keep those data domains. And then just thinking about the data sets you've defined, what's being provisioned around the organization, what are people consuming in terms of data sets? And they started to think about, are they wrapped up? And importantly, do look at proper product management approaches here, not just starting to call your data set a data product, because there's disciplines that should be followed, and you Google them, you find them. You can absolutely nudge, and then people will have a rather geeky conversation around, do data products sit in one data domain or can they span data domains? That can all be solved. They will span data domains, because if someone wants this data set of data and it's got customer data and it's got order data in it, that's potentially data from two data domains, but to put those together in a nice data set that someone is interested in, someone gets value from, you're starting to bridge data domains. So you absolutely can evolve from a data domain centric approach into a data product management approach. And you might keep data domains as high level groupings with very senior accountability, but you're absolutely going to drive lower level accountability at the data product level, and you're going to know who you call when there's a problem with that data product, and that data product contains like 25 customer data elements. So it's really precise and really granular, but you absolutely can evolve into that.
Nice, nice, interesting. Conscious of time, Pete.
Yep.
To finish then, so if there's anyone about to embark upon this journey or is in the midst of an overhaul or a tweaking or whatever the case may be, what are the three bits of kind of top level advice that you'd give people to
Yep.
kind of really consider as they go on that journey?
Yeah, I think that people are probably thinking people is the most important one. So that team structure, organizational structure, central team design, federated team design, hiring the right people, the right roles and responsibilities with the right performance management, and it being in day-to-day job duties and role definitions. That's got to be the most important thing. So I would say focus on the people first. If you can get the people right, it is truly game changing. Clutching onto those champions who really are going to help you and be your best friend as you're improving data in an organization. So people's the first one. You mentioned adoption, and there's a real angle of adoption around the tooling, and there is a trap related to technology and tooling due to the lack of adoption. So the second one is watch out for that. So if you're buying a data catalog, you've selected it, you've been through a process, you pick the best one for your organization, you have brilliant business requirements, it's then implemented, and you look back in 6 months' time and you think people aren't using it. There's nothing in here. Why aren't they using it? So that is not the tool's fault. That's a lack of operating model around the tool and a lack of ways of working and processes around the tool. So don't blame the tool, and make sure you don't fall into that trap. You're going to spend really good money on tooling, and some of it's quite expensive because it's enterprise tooling. So make sure when you select that tool and the vendor's really excited to come in and implement it for you, you've got the right operating model waiting to wrap around that. And if you're taking the approach we've discussed around product management and incremental value, when you're defining your data and so on, that's going into the catalog. So make sure the tooling is woven in and you've got the operating model around the tool. Otherwise, you're going to waste money and you're going to get told off. Lastly, I'll be selfish and say, select the right external partner to help you. And no, you don't have to select a partner if you've got the right data team internally. But we've got good knowledge. Choose a good consulting firm that you trust, and they will be a brilliant advisor to you. They will test you and your thinking. They will help you deliver quickly. They will get the right shape and fit to your organization. Yes, it's going to cost you, but we're really keen in building long-term partnerships with the clients where they trust us and they can delve down into collaboration and sort of deep delivery with teams, our teams helping them, or then elevating back up to advisory when they don't need that extra capacity. So I would encourage you to lean on an external partner. I know sometimes consulting gets a bad rep, and I apologize for that. I hope that changes over time. And I think humanizing consulting is a good thing because we're just people and we just want to help people to deliver and improve. So yeah, focus on the people. Watch out for that tooling adoption trap because that's very expensive. I would suggest you get the right external partner. Can I sneak in a fourth one?
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Data culture. So I think we've touched on that. I think it's an additional part of when we do a data operating model, which is almost like one of the fifth pillars. And I think even if you don't feel like you're deliberately doing something on data culture, really think about it. Because for us, data culture is your behaviors and natural ways of working in an organization related to data. And you're always, if it's not good, you're just looking to nudge that over time. So the right ways of working in your operating model, affecting and improving data and improving your data culture is a really great thread to take through as you implement your data operating model. So just think about data culture. Cheeky one, snuck in at the end.
Yeah. Nice. Well, Pete, thank you so much for giving up your time. I guess if anyone's interested in picking your brains about how you might be able to help them, what's the best way
Of
for them
course.
to reach you?
Yeah, they'll find me on LinkedIn, or I think my details are on the Ortecha website, ortecha.com. Yeah, so really happy to have conversations. I do enjoy a good discussion around data. Yeah, so feel free to reach out, whether it's data operating model or anything else, sort of data practitioner wise. Be really good to have a chat.
Excellent. All right, Pete, thanks for your time.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Carl.